Hello and welcome. This is Gunner, and this video is going to be a discussion of the best musical groups in the genres of new wave and post-punk. Although categorized as separate genres, both new wave and post-punk music share similar origins, transitioning from and refining the punk sound of the 1970s. This refinement included incorporating sounds from genres outside the previously mostly rock-inspired punk genre, in particular world music and reggae being popular sources of inspiration, as well as adding in varying degrees of electronic sounds to the music. To simply define the two genres, as easily as any genre can be defined, especially when many of the musicians so categorized care more about producing what music they want to create rather than what genre they are linked to, new wave and its subgenres are considered to be the more poppy mainstream of the two, while post-punk is the more avant-garde underground genre. Much like their predecessors, both new wave and post-punk would include a rather diverse range of sounds, including and spinning off several genres, such as the new romantic subgenre of new wave, made popular by bands such as Visage, to the no-wave subgenre of post-punk represented by the harsh, jazzy sounds of James Chance and the Contortions. It is not uncommon to find musical groups linked to both genres, as the line between the two, especially as musicians varied their sound over the years, can become rather blurred. New wave and post-punk would be born in the 1970s and exist throughout the 1980s, but as much as the two genres are considered to have faded out of popularity, they continue to inspire and influence modern music. Sole representative of the very popular new romantic movement within new wave music is a hard subgenre to ignore when making a list like this, because it is the new romantic movement that played a big part in the second British invasion, having a lot of exposure in the early era of MTV. The problem with the subgenre is that as much as it was popular, the number of one-hit wonders and groups that have little to offer outside the 2 or 3 songs they are known for are astounding. Duran Duran I consider to be an exception to this, but unfortunately an exception with caveats. As much as their first few albums have a good depth of quality that I value highly when considering any musical group, I feel that the quality of their albums progressively falls off over time to the point of being hard to recommend. Perhaps this is a cynical point of view, but in a way their longevity worked against them. If the band had broken up after their first few albums, like some of the other groups on this list, I would have rated them much higher. Being also categorized as a synth pop band, the incorporation of electronic sounds is evident, with the prevalent drum machine and synthesizer notes, along with powerful vocals being a large part of their sound. Their debut album, Duran Duran, from 1981, displays them at their best, with songs like Girls on Film being one of their more well-known tracks. Their second album, Rio, is a strong follow-up, with Rio and Hungry Like the Wolf popular hits. 1983 saw the release of their third album, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, with songs like The Reflex and New Moon on Monday featured. Unfortunately, I cannot recommend any of the albums after these first 3, as I feel that quality continues to drop off at this point to unlistenable levels by the mid-1990s, and never really recovered. The first representative of the post-punk genre on this list is one of the bands sometimes cited as inspiration for the later grunge rock genre. A perfect example of punk mentalities refined and transitioned into the post-punk sound of the 1980s, as well as the common trend of some of the bands from this genre going a little too far in an attempt to keep mainstream success that would cause the band to falter in the 1990s. Could I be happy? Much like the early work of many of the other musical groups on this list, their 1979 debut album, Entertainment, has a strong punk sound, with songs like Damaged Goods being a highlight. Songs like To Hell with Poverty, I Love a Man in a Uniform, and Womantown would showcase the evolving change of Gang of Four's music in the early 1980s, as well as the political nature of many of their songs. After a hiatus in the mid-1980s, Gang of Four would release 2 more albums in the 1990s that would exhibit some of their weakest performances, after which they disbanded, not reforming again until the mid-2000s. In 2011, they released a new album titled Content, which returned the band back to their former fiery glory. But unfortunately, the lead singer, John King, would leave the band shortly after its release, and the 2015 Gang of Four album, What Happens Next, is a major departure from their previous album, and not really recommended.
Face worker, a serpentine miner, a roof falls, an underliner of leaf structure, the egg timer.
Another band that would inspire later alternative rock bands, Wire's 1977 debut album, Pink Flag, although good, was decidedly punk in nature. Their next album, Chairs Missing, would move on to a more experimental sound that would still be grounded in punk rock, but would start to steer them towards the transition to their own unique post-punk sound that would continue with their third album, 154.
Practice makes perfect, yes I can prove it. Business or pleasure, the more that you do it. Please dress in your best things, this course was unplanned. Cause you see up in my bedroom I've got Sarah Bernard's hand.
After a breakup that would last until the mid-1980s, the band would reform but completely abandon and refuse to play their earlier work, moving to a mostly electronic composition and having a more generic new wave sound that had none of the creative edge that their earlier work was known for. After disbanding in the early 1990s, Wire would reform again in the early 2000s and take on more of the spirit of their earlier work and discover newfound success. Wire is a band I definitely recommend focusing on their earlier work, but unfortunately an example of another band that I feel lost its way until possibly more recently.
I don't mind you coming here and wasting all my time.
At the forefront of the American New Wave scene in the late 1970s and 1980s, the Cars stood behind a strong base of a guitar and synthesizer-focused sound mixed with the elements of punk, art rock, and rockabilly inspiration.
It's so easy to blow up your problems. It's so easy to play up your breakdown. It's so easy to fly through a window. It's so easy to move with the sound.
The consistency of their sound is a major strength of the band and did not waver all that much throughout their original tenure. Their debut album, The Cars, is one of their best and is laden with well-known hits. Notable songs from other albums include Shake It Up, Magic, and You Might Think. An active member of the New York punk scene of the 1970s, Talking Heads is a band that led the way transitioning post-punk and new wave music by incorporating sounds from genres outside the traditionally rock-inspired punk genre, such as world music and funk, and mixing it with avant-garde art rock sensibilities.
The band in heaven, they play my favorite song. Play it once again. Play it all night long.
Of all the bands on this list, Talking Heads is dear to my heart, having memories listening to them as a child, and it is probably because of the Talking Heads that I have such a love for post-punk and new wave music. The list of songs I would recommend are endless, but chief among them are I Want to Live, Psycho Killer, No Compassion, Road to Nowhere, and Nothing But Flowers.
You say you love me, but not quite yet. I wanna go out there to a sheltered place. Let's taste the cry and show your face. So I'm so sick to the
Probably the most obscure entry on this list, Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry, or as their fans called them, the Lorries, are a post-punk band that sadly saw only limited success in the UK and are practically unknown in the United States.
Yeah, they told me I was having fun, but I'm still waiting, I'm still waiting. Desperation, education, another avenue.
Exhibiting powerful barking vocals, driving instrumentals, backed by the popular, for the time, drum machine, their 1985 debut album, Talk About the Weather, was their most successful and arguably best album, and is a great introduction to their sound, especially as modern versions of the album are paired with some great singles that were never released on any of their albums. Some singles that are also worth listening to and not found on that version of the album are Spinning Round and Walking on Your Hands. Another inspiration for the later grunge rock genre, the Boston-based Mission of Burma was a powerful and notoriously loud representative of the American post-punk scene. Sadly, their loud stage performances would cost them, as one band member would have to call it quits after suffering from worsening tinnitus, leading to the band dissolving.
That's when I reach for my revolver. That's when it all gets blown away.
Only 2 albums were released under their original 4-year run from 1979 to 1983, the EP Signals, Calls, and Marches, featuring the songs Academy Fight Song and That's When I Reach for My Revolver, and their second release, the first full album, was Verses, with songs like Trem 2 having a dreamy quality, while songs like That's How I Escape My Certain Fate having an aggressive in-your-face style. In the early 2000s, Mission of Burma would reform after the unexpected success of what was supposed to be a one-off reunion tour. 4 more albums would be released after reforming, returning Mission of Burma right back to their rocking form, and the band remains active to the present. Formed in 1976, Siouxsie and the Banshees would originally be associated with the punk rock scene. The band would be one of the leaders in transitioning to the post-punk sound. Led by Siouxsie Sue's howling vocals, the group would be a major inspiration to the goth rock genre. Their debut album, The Scream, includes the song Overground, which showcases the power of Siouxsie Sue's shouting vocals, as well as the driving Mirage. Other notable Siouxsie and the Banshees songs from throughout their career include Icons, Love in a Void, Christine, Happy House, Spellbound, Cities in Dust, This Wheel's on Fire, and my personal favorite, Arabian Nights. Also known as the Chameleons UK in the United States, to avoid confusion with a similarly named American band, the Chameleons, formed in 1981, demonstrate perfectly the transition and refinement of the punk rock sound into something more mainstream. A perfect introduction to post-punk music for anyone unfamiliar with the genre, the Chameleons are much more approachable than some of their more avant-garde peers like Bauhaus. Only releasing 3 albums before disbanding in 1987, each of the albums released under their original tenure, Script of the Bridge, What Does Anything Mean Basically, and Strange Times, are easily recommendable. Due to the confusion of having two different names depending on region, you may have to search for the Chameleons UK when looking for Strange Times on iTunes in particular.
Under blue moon I saw you, so soon you'll take me up in your arms, too late to beg you or cancel it, though I know it must be the killing time.
Formed out of Liverpool in 1978, Echo and the Bunnymen are the quintessential new wave band, representing all of the strengths of the genre, an approachable poppy sound mixed with some quirky weirdness. Led by the powerful presence of frontman Ian McCulloch, also known as Mac the Mouth, for his vocal and frank opinions of his own and other musicians' talents. He knew he was good and made sure at every opportunity to tell you all about it. Echo and the Bunnymen would have several hits on UK charts, chiefly The Killing Moon and Lips Like Sugar being their most popular. My personal favorite album is Heaven Up Here for its more aggressive tone, which if you are sharp-eyed you will note that is the record spinning on the turntable during the intro of all of my videos. My favorite song on that album being Show of Strength. If this was a list of my favorite musical groups of all time, rather than just new wave and post-punk, The Cure would still be high on my list. A major inspiration to the goth rock genre, The Cure would start in the late 1970s with what founder and frontman Robert Smith would refer to as a punk Beatles sound, evident in their debut album Boys Don't Cry.
Close my eyes and hold so tightly, scared of what the morning brings. Waiting for tomorrow never comes. Deep inside the empty feeling, all the nighttime leaves me.
Moving on to a more moody and dark sound found on albums like Pornography, and then the poppier and lighter feeling albums like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. The Cure, throughout their long tenure, have produced a sound that not only has a great depth of quality, but also has great diversity that ensures they never get stale. My absolute favorite band, period. An inspiration to many musicians, sadly Joy Division was only in existence for a short period, releasing only 2 full studio albums before lead singer Ian Curtis, after battling depression and failing health due to epilepsy, took his own life. After his death, the rest of the band would go on to form the also excellent band New Order, where they would find mainstream success. New Order deserves a spot on this list, but to keep the list shorter, I will consider the number 1 spot to be jointly shared by Joy Division and New Order. Not that the number that any of these bands find themselves ranked at on this list really has any meaning. They are all excellent bands.
We'll give you everything and more. This thing is too much, can't take much more. Water, run through fire, can't seem to feel it anymore.
The rough voice of Ian Curtis may be off-putting to someone not familiar with the group and may take some getting used to, but is an integral part of the character of the band, meshing with the brilliant instrumentation and at times experimental-sounding electronic notes, all forming a greater whole. With a dark and moody feel, Joy Division may not be for everyone, but it is the emotional power of the music of Joy Division that make them so good in my mind. New Order has a much more approachable sound and might be the better starting point for a beginner. Probably the most well-known song of Joy Division's is Love Will Tear Us Apart. Songs like Transmission are also good starting points for someone unfamiliar with the band. My personal favorite song is New Dawn Fades. Well, that wraps up my list of the best musical groups of new wave and post-punk. There are many bands that could have easily made it on this list, or ones I chose not to include that maybe you would have. A couple examples of musical groups that are good enough to be on this list, but I chose not to include due to questions of whether or not they fit the genre, include Television and Blondie. Some bands that are also quite good, but I chose not to include due to their less approachable nature or lack of consistency include examples like the pop group and Para Ubu. If there is a musical group that is missing from this list that you feel really should be here but yet isn't, it is probably because I don't really care for them, and considering this is my list, that is my decision to make. That doesn't mean I do not respect what those groups have to offer, just that they really aren't my cup of tea. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed the video. This is Mouse Gunner, signing out.